Welcome back to Movies TV Mad. You can follow me on Twitter at Movies TV Mad, and a very warm welcome to Wednesday's edition of the DC Universe Daily Unpopular Opinion Time. Christopher Nolan should have directed Man of Steel instead of Zack Snyder. I don't think there was a DC nerd who wasn't excited of Christopher Nolan's involvement when Man of Steel was announced, and we all made the mistaken assumption that Chris would not only co-write the movie and produce it under his production company, that he would also direct the movie. But Chris poo-pooed this idea from the very beginning, saying he just didn't have the experience with VFX to do what was needed to make this film look as stunning in VFX as possible. There's no question about it. In terms of visually and the VFX and CGI, Zack Snyder did an outstanding job with Man of Steel. The VFX is still light years beyond its time, and nobody can say any different. But this kind of gets me to thinking back to a Tom Mankiewicz interview when he was talking about the process of writing Superman the movie. He says, it can look great, and that'll make a great trailer. It just won't make a great movie. And I'm always reminded of that when I think of Man of Steel. When I see the great VFX or cinematography, it takes more than that to make a great movie, and that's lost on a lot of people and a lot of stands today. Man of Steel does make a great trailer, but does it make a great Superman movie? So why else didn't Christopher Nolan direct this movie? This was an idea from his good friend David Goyer, who he co-wrote the story for every chapter of his Dark Knight trilogy with. Chris was the one who went to Goyer because of his experience writing DC characters at DC Comics. That's why Goyer was there. Man of Steel was a different situation because Man of Steel and the whole alien invasion thing was David's idea. So basically what Chris was trying to do was respect that and help the man get his vision realized. So they co-wrote the story together. But Chris wasn't leading the narrative on this movie. He spent most of his time on set protecting Zack Snyder's vision, directorial vision, from interference from Warner Bros. Executives and Jeff Johns. Here's the problem. Maybe he shouldn't have been doing that. I love Man of Steel, and I've already said, visually, it's stunning. But on this channel previously, we have spoken about this movie's problems. And, elements of those problems are, regrettably, Zack Snyder. I love Zack Snyder as a director. I love the Snyderverse, but it doesn't mean I can't critique the situation. Man of Steel and the DCEU going forward would have been in a much better position now if Chris was in charge of the actual franchise and actually took the lead in Man of Steel and took the position he took with the Dark Knight trilogy. But as I said earlier, he wasn't as passionate about Superman as he was in Batman. I've also discussed before how Man of Steel should have been canon to the Dark Knight trilogy and, been canon to the Dark Knight Rises, which they never wanted to do. Christian Bale should have been Batman in the DCEU. These were the inherent mistakes. It's like I was talking about yesterday. If they told people that the DCEU, or the first chapter of it, was an adaptation of Injustice, all the problems they had with Man of Steel, especially with Superman killing Zod, could have been avoided. But they didn't do that because they're not tactical and they're not smart. I hear a lot about this. A director should be allowed to execute their vision, and no one should interfere with that. But we're not talking about fan fiction here. We're talking about a huge influx of WB money, and they're investing that money to get that money back 4 or 5, 6 times over. It's a business, not a charity. If Christopher Nolan directed this movie and took the lead and was able to say to David Goyer at times, you're not doing this, you're not doing that, we would have been in a better position. For example, one of the things I was taken back by Man of Steel was how when Superman arrives on Earth, One minute the ship crash lands, then he's on that big ship and he's an adult. It's a bit weird because they want to do this via flashbacks. Now, Goya did the same thing with Batman Begins, where kind of the origins of the character were shown in flashbacks, and it worked. The kind of flashbacks and the kind of early stages of Cavill's Clark Kent are very similar to Bale's kind of Bruce Wayne kind of steps in his origin story. But I just felt what they did with Bale's Bruce Wayne in the first hour of the movie worked better than what they did with Cavill's journey. So both Bruce Wayne and Cavill's Clark Kent are travelling around the world trying to find themselves. And, you know, we see that basically Bruce Wayne discovers the League of Shadows, and someone who is actually Ra's al Ghul that he doesn't actually know is Ra's al Ghul, and he gets this training, and it's brilliant. And you've got Liam Neeson as a mentor. With Clark Kent, he's travelling around, he conveniently finds the ship, sees the image of Jor-El and quickly becomes Superman. It simply doesn't work like Bale's Bruce Wayne's origins did. So already the narrative is falling around on its feet. And I believe the difference is Christopher Nolan was in charge of Batman Begins. And if he saw Goya doing something that he didn't like, he could stop him. For example, he did not like Superman killing Zod. He told Goya this, and Goya explained it, and unfortunately, because Nolan had given him a free hand in this movie, they'd worked together so well, he helped, make the Dark Knight trilogy so well, he felt he owed him this. He didn't feel that he could actually say, you know what, you're not going to do this. And so that's where the problems were. Christopher Nolan wasn't in charge of this movie. If he directed it and if he was in charge of this movie, the results of Man of Steel probably would have been as outstanding as Batman Begins. Batman Begins is one of my favourite comic book movies and adaptations. It really works because you get 1 hour of Christian Bale. Now, I don't want to start trouble here because I love Henry Cavill as Clark and Superman, but we have to be honest. Henry Cavill isn't as magnetic and as a strong actor as Christian Bale. What this Superman movie needed was an actor as strong as Christian Bale. As dark and as brooding as Bale is naturally, we needed an actor in the other way. Now, look, he does a good job playing the good guy Clark Kent and the good guy Superman. I just feel he didn't have the acting prowess of Christian Bale. Very few people have, of course. But I just think that if they found someone as proficient as Bale, but in the opposite, it could have worked. So I think they're the two things already, with Christopher Nolan not being in charge and not actually directing the movie, you lose that first hour of a very good origin story because we kind of rushed. He's kind of like traveling. As I say, he conveniently finds the spaceship and it is all very, very convenient. All of a sudden, he finds a job where the place is. He meets Lois Lane very quickly and he finds his costume and he becomes Superman. Now, the first flight thing is outstanding. I love the reaction of Superman when he's flying for the first time. It is beautiful. But as I say, Christopher Nolan firstly should have directed this movie, should have taken the lead on this movie, and it should have been, the DCEU should have been the continuation of the Dark Knight trilogy. Now, Nolan didn't want to do this. He felt he did what he wanted to do. Batman was his baby. He wanted to do a Batman trilogy from the very beginning, and he wasn't as invested in Superman. And that's where the problems began. You understand why WB said when Christopher Nolan said, oh, David Goya's got an idea for a Superman movie, and they're going, wicked bruvs, this is going to be fucking amazing. They just delivered an excellent, 2 movies with $1 billion each, over $1 billion each, brilliant Batman trilogy. How could this possibly go wrong? Well, it went wrong because they brought in Zack Snyder. Zack Snyder, when he was first, offered this, he said, well, I just don't see how you make the character relatable. It's always the real relatability of Superman where these people talk about. And basically, they saw Goya's script and they liked it because Goya wanted to put Superman in the real world. You see, Goya's and Nolan's Batman is, of course, in the real world because if you've got the money and you've got the intellectual, technical prowess, you could be Batman. You know, theoretically, you could create the costumes. Theoretically, you can create the gadgets. Theoretically, everything that Batman does in the comics and the films, even the animation, pretty much, apart from when he goes to space, right? And even that theoretically probably is possible. Everything about Batman is doable if you've got the money and the intellectual prowess. But Superman is not a real character. He's an alien who has heat vision, who's impervious to pain, who can fly. Those things are simply not possible right now. He's a fantastical character. You can't bring a fantastical character in the real world. Superman is probably one of the few fictional characters, and I've said this on many occasions on this very channel, that you should never try and subvert expectations on. I think this is where you go wrong. So you've got a bunch of people who want to bring Superman in the real world and want to do things that are going to upset people. Watchmen is a subversive story. It was created to be a subversive story because basically Alan Moore knew he couldn't just take existing DC characters and make them subversive. You needed a new take. And that's why those graphic novels work, and his original graphic novel works so well. Snyder did his thing, but even Snyder, what Snyder did on a subversive graphic novel was utterly controversial and divisive as well. So if he's going to make, if Watchmen is going to be a divisive movie, what the hell is he going to do to a Superman movie? This is something that Christopher Nolan should have identified with at the very beginning. So the whole thing was becoming problematic as we went into the movie and as the development of the movie happened. And they were never going to get away with it. Now, Man of Steel has its fans that don't see any flaws with the movie. I'm a fan of the movie, but the flaws are so blatantly there, you can't ignore them. And this is why the DCEU is where it is today. And then BVS took it to other levels. Because Man of Steel didn't make the money, they blamed Superman again and they brought in Batman. And they said to Zack Snyder, well, we're getting rid of, we're not going to be involved with Christopher Nolan and Goya in this movie. They kind of blamed them and kind of went with Snyder, which was utterly the wrong thing to do. You either get rid of all of them or you get rid of none of them. In fact, the very reason that BVS was the film it ended up being, because Nolan wasn't there to say no when it got so insane and so divisive and subversive, if you like, because Snyder was like a kid with a bunch of toys where he could do whatever he liked, and that was the rod that broke the DC Extended Universe's back. So for me, Christopher Nolan should have directed this movie, should have been in charge of the development of the DCEU. And if you want kind of realistic DC characters, there are other characters you can do that with, like Green Arrow and like the Suicide Squad universe. But Nolan didn't want to take full leadership of this franchise, and that's where the problem began. This has been Wednesday's edition of the DC Universe Daily with me, Mick, your host with the most. Just ask your girlfriends and your wives. Please like, share, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you never miss this beautiful perfection. And I'll see you again in the next video. Until I see you again, goodbye, au revoir, auf Wiedersehen.